Welcome and good evening, or good day, should you be joining us from another time zone. We have attendees from across the US and abroad for this discussion of oral histories in the present tense. It is a pleasure to welcome each of you. My name is Beth Finch, and I am the Lunder Curator of American Art and the Interim Director of the Lunder Institute at the Colby College Museum of Art. I am joining you from the Lunder Institute's offices in downtown Waterville, Maine. We are gathering virtually, and perhaps that makes an acknowledgement of place all the more important. The Colby Museum and its Lunder Institute are situated in the homeland of the Wabanaki Confederacy, which encompasses the Micmac, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations. We express our respect for the Indigenous communities, past, present, and future of these ancestral lands. A few words about the Lunder Institute Talks. They were established in 2020 and feature artists and scholars who are invited to speak about new research and creative production within the field of American art. This is the first of our spring 2021 series, and I will mention the events to come at the end of tonight's conversation. Before introducing our guests, I should note a few important details. This event is accompanied by closed captioning. To manage this feature, click the CC icon on the screen. And we also welcome your participation in this event. To ask a question, please add it to the Q&A feature. The chat function is where we are offering event details like these. We will turn to questions in the last 15 minutes of our conversation. So, to that conversation. In the summer of 2020, the Smithsonian's Archives of American Art reached out to dozens of artists in the art world to understand their experience during a time of interrelated crises. The resulting pandemic oral history project is an extraordinary record of a difficult time and is the main focus of tonight's conversation. We are honored to be joined today by the artist Wendy Red Star, who participated in the project and is an advisory board member of the Archives of American Art Journal, and is herself an avid archive researcher. Raised on the Crow Reservation in Montana and now based in Portland, Oregon, she creates works that explore representation, self-representation, and the reconsideration of history within the contemporary context. Also joining me are two members of the Archives of American Art staff. Ben Gillespie is the Arlene and Robert Kogod Secretarial Scholar for Oral History, and Liza Kirwin, who has held many key roles at the Archives, is currently serving as its interim director. Welcome, Ben, Liza, and Wendy. It's great to see you all.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor.
So we will begin our conversation by being visited by one of the artists who participated, the Los Angeles-based artist, Mark Bradford, as a way to give everyone a sense of what these interviews are like, and perhaps also to sort of mark the tone and purpose of this conversation this evening. So this interview was by Nissa Chow, and it took place in August of last year. So if we could see that video now.
Just the other day, I said, well, girl, you know how when it's like a big a deluge of rain, and you know you're running down the street and you're getting wet, and then every once in a while you run into underhang or something, and you stay there for a minute, and you just okay, and then you run back. You got to look for those little spaces, those little spaces in between the rain. You're gonna get wet, but you got to find those little, and you stay there for a minute, and you wait and you say, okay, well, looks like the rain's a little less, and then you run to the next one. That's where we are now. But you know, the funny thing is, when you're there, sometimes you run into a little, under a little awning, sometimes you look to the left and there'll be somebody there with you. And you say, what are you doing? Oh, well, and you have a little conversation. You might say, well, you know, girl, I'm a little nervous too. Well, me too. Yeah, well, you know, and then, you know, you have a little moment. And then you might give each other a little squeeze and say, okay, girl, I'm gonna run out here now. That's where we are. Right now, me and you, we're standing under a little pass. Me and you were talking, we're having a little conversation. It's raining, but we're having a little conversation and we're feeling each other. And I'm getting a little bit of strength from you, and I hope you're getting a little strength from me, and that's what we're doing.
So Ben, I'm wondering if you probably were one of the first people to see this video. What did it offer you as an oral history in the present tense?
Well, starting with the Mark Bradford video, you have to mention it's 77 minutes long. It is very lengthy, and there's so much richness throughout it. He has incredible energy and talking about his experience and his life. And that's really the power of oral history in and of itself, is you get these moments to record anxieties or nervousness and to forge a human connection in that moment. And so getting this for the first time, you know, really embodied what we were hoping to achieve a lot of in this project, and as part of a larger constellation of bringing all of these voices together to record the travails of 2020.
Wendy, had you ever seen that clip before?
I've almost watched all of them. So yes, I have. And I just love Mark Bradford. He's so inspirational. So it's just great to have that captured.
And Liza, I wondered, is Mark Bradford's, are his papers yet part of the archives, or is that a future goal?
Not yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's a wonderful way to start off with those words from him. Liza, you have a long view of the archive's history, and the field of American art history emerged with and matured with the Archives of American Art, which was established in 1954 and became part of the Smithsonian in 1970. What is special about this pandemic oral history project? What need has it answered for you all? And love to hear you speak about that.
Well, it is really central to our mission to document the history of the visual arts in the US, but it is very different for us because we had to adapt to a new way of working. Last summer, like so many of us, our traditional ways of working just ground to a halt. And we turned to Zoom, which was the communication platform of the moment. We didn't really know anything about it until last June. Now we're quite familiar with Zoom, and we used it to capture the art world response to the pandemic, and also a national reckoning with social injustice, and with racial injustice as it unfolded in the moment. So it's kind of our first effort at rapid response collecting, but it was also a strategic response to our curators really thinking about what to get now for the future so that we can understand who we are at any given time.
And Ben, you led the project amongst the curators. Building on what Liza has shared, what more, additional background? How did this project come about, and what were its aims?
Well, so originally we intended the project as a means of checking in. So since everything ground to a halt, all of our oral histories, we needed some way to stay in touch with people, to let them know, hey, we are still working. And so it started quite small from there, and then just sort of blossomed as we realized, oh, this is such a powerful way to connect with people, and we can bring in more voices, we can reach around the world. So the interviews, they're all over the United States. We go to Norway, we go to France, we go to Lebanon, and just the incredible flexibility of that really came to be an advantage. And we were looking to build on that and to figure out what we could make with all those voices coming together. And so it was really, it was new for me. I was brand new to the archive. So I think it was good because I was able to just think, oh, we'll do something completely different. And it was an amazing way for us to augment our traditional oral histories, which, as you likely know, are usually full life stories, telling the full retrospective arc of a career. And so this was a fantastic way for us to get that on the ground, in the moment, rapid response collection to really preserve this moment for future researchers.
And how did you build the group of people you reached out to? Was it through your interviewers? How did you begin that process to figure out who you would interview?
There were many levels to the process. So it started with people who we were already in touch with. And so it grew from there with people that our curatorial team were already in talks with, and then just identifying artists all over who were involved in interesting projects. And so it just sort of, yeah, it was organic, I guess. It's very difficult. There wasn't really rhyme or reason because we just sort of grew as we were able to. And we were so lucky to be able to include all the voices that we were.
And did you, were you able to, did you add interviewers to the process, or were you working entirely with existing interviewers? Because you're working with people from all over the country, right?
Right, so we did, we used all of the curatorial team to conduct interviews, which was fantastic. And we were also able to bring in some amazing outside interviewers, Misa Chow, who did that Mark Bradford interview, Fernanda Espinosa, who conducted quite a few interviews for us, as well as Laura Evans, and Melissa Ho. But yeah, we can talk about them later, but it was just amazing to be able to augment our own team, to not be overwhelmed with conducting so many interviews.
And aside from the Mark Bradford interview, which is 77 minutes long, most of the interviews are 20 to 30 minutes. Was that what was that? How was that decision made?
Well, we aimed for 20 minutes because we knew that people would speak for longer. So we had about 30 minutes in mind and then said 20 minutes, and it worked out. The average length across the project is somewhere around 27 minutes.
Yeah, okay, great. And Wendy, you work with archives frequently. What role do they play in your process, and how did that inform your decision to participate in this project?
Well, actually, the person who interviewed me, Josh Franco, we actually had a connection through the Joan Mitchell Foundation, where he talked about the importance of archiving papers. And so my idea of an archive was objects, historical objects, maybe photos, but I wasn't really thinking about papers so much. So just talking with Josh sort of opened up a whole new avenue of the archive. And so it was really wonderful to actually have an opportunity to be interviewed by Josh, since we had that past connection. But yeah, I just feel like the archive plays such an important role, especially as I just, for anybody, I think you tend to think of them as like maybe a part of the past, but they really inform the present and ways to move forward in the future. So to me, I think everybody should dip into the archives, just so you can ground yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally, I mean, my experience working at the Archives of American Art, there have been those wondrous days when I can find time to have actual boxes brought out. It's an extraordinary experience to have those kind of moments of discovery with these unique pieces of paper and reflections from the past. Yes,
and if you can, I'm a sucker for historical gossip, so I'm always looking for that.
Absolutely. When you were interviewed by Josh Franco, you mentioned a work that you had needed to press pause on, or that it was at least postponed in the lead up to or during the pandemic. That exhibition is now on view at the Joslin Museum. And I'd love to hear you talk with us about that work and reflect a little bit on, how or whether it was influenced, or how the pandemic may have influenced how it ended up being in its final form.
When I reflect on the interview that I did with Josh, I mean, viewing it at it now, I'm like, wow, she's super optimistic. And I'm actually really grateful, but it also seems like I'm so different also, because I've gotten sort of used to this way of working in the virtual. So what I've seen from many of the institutions, curators, people that I'm working with, is their ingenuity to make it work. And so this exhibition definitely was that quality came out with this work. The curator, Annika Johnson, she installed over 500 individual photos for this piece. And this piece is based on the Indian Congress that happened in 1898 that was in correlation with the Trans-Mississippian International Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska. And the Joslin is in Omaha. And there was a photographer who was the main photographer for the exposition. And the Indian Congress, there was an Indian encampment as part of that fair. And he photographed, his name is Frank Reinhardt, all of the Native attendants, which there were, I think, over 30 tribes represented, including my own, the Crow Nation. And the other kind of amazing aspect of this event, it led to Frank Reinhardt traveling to my reservation in 1900 to a location that's just a few miles away from where I grew up, that I know very intimately, and photograph my community at a summer gathering. And so it was amazing to go to that very specific spot and stand there and look at some of his photos and see exactly where he was what vantage point he was shooting from. So for this particular project, I just wanted to feel the enormity of that gathering of over 500 Native bodies coming together. And the exposition really was representing manifest destiny. The Native people represented the old, and the exposition was the new. And I wanted to show sort of the power and the resilience of Native people, and sort of that thread line that links directly to me and to my community from this specific moment in time.
And did you feel that the work was influenced in terms of, did it change form at all through the pandemic, or did you know how it was going to be realized and it ended up being that way?
So amazingly, we were able to hire another artist who lived in Omaha. Annika Johnson found this artist who was able to make, their name is Corson, make a virtual replica. And so like the crazy stuff that I had in my mind, like I want American flags and I want 500 cutouts that are standing up somehow. Corson was able to digitally bring that stuff out of my brain. And so then Annika and I and the exhibition team were all on the same page. And I was like, why don't I need to just do this forever? No, I need Corson with me forever. So I think that was kind of one of the beautiful things that came out of the fact that we had to do everything kind of virtual. And so that made it really kind of go smoothly.
So kind of a necessity, ingenuity from necessity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Liza, I remember when we first began speaking about this event, you mentioned that you spoke about 2020 versus 1918. And you said that you look for records related to American artists' responses to the 1918 pandemic and didn't find so many of them. I wonder if you know why, maybe you don't, but also how this moment is different in terms of its documentation.
Well, oddly enough, there was hardly anything in the archives of American art about 1918, when you think that more than 50 million people died in that influenza epidemic. There's very little trace of it, which, we look to the past, look to the archives to find meaning in the present and to find a path forward, and there wasn't any. I don't exactly know what to make of it. I've asked a lot of my curator friends in American art history, like, how to account for this, how to account for lack of a visual record of the pandemic in 1918. There's some, much more mixed in with the end of World War I and less about the pandemic itself. So we really did think very actively about how to create a record for the future of this time. I think sometimes we live through the current moment and we think what's important, like what will be remembered. I think we all know that this time we're living through now will be significant to future generations. They will want to know what this experience was like because it was so unprecedented. And so I think that it's important for us to try to create as complete or iterative a record that we could to so that people can interpret it maybe with greater clarity in the future than we have right now.
And our archives talking to each other, because we are hearing of other, there's so much effort to gather and collect from this moment. Is that within the field? Is that a discussion that is happening?
Yes, a lot, even within the Smithsonian, there have been a lot of really significant collecting efforts, and around the country in other archives. Our lens is very particular to the American art world, but it's part of a much larger picture of this time. And so, we're creating that piece of it to remember, but within the context of our own collections. But yeah, there's a lot of really tremendous efforts to document this time, and I think a lot will come out of it in the future.
Well, yeah. Well, many of the interviews ask artists to reflect on how the pandemic was changing their work or not, right? Not having an impact. And this relates, I felt, to a recent New York Times feature on the creative mind in quarantine. I think they spoke with 75, not quite the 85 that you all have connected to. And so, there's one particular, well, there's many, but there's one interview that represents a creative mind at work in quarantine. So I thought we might segue to that, a video excerpt from an interview with the artist Demi. It was conducted by Josh Franco, like the one with you, Wendy. Demi was born in 1955 in Cuba and goes by the single name Demi, and she lives and works in Miami. So let's watch that video now.
I do not like to paint in an easel anymore. I mean, I have been painting for the past 35 years. I have painted in my easel, small, medium, large size painting, but not anymore. I decided on March 10th that what I needed was to paint large murals. Like I'm talking about from 120 inches long to 120 inches wide, which is almost the size of my studio. I needed something larger than life, like which I was confronting this thing, this coronavirus, which is larger than life.
So quite a video. Demi's papers are also collected by the archives. Is that, has that been one of your, that wasn't necessarily your only criterion, but was that one of the ways that you decided who you would reach out to? Liza, perhaps?
You mean answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in adding to the written record, it gives a different kind of dimension. That was one of the ways we were thinking about it. I think we thought about who to involve in many different ways. So it wasn't solely people that we had their papers or that we had scheduled an interview but couldn't get to it, that kind of thing. We wanted it to be very broad, and we wanted to have it deep and broad and multi-generational. And I think we achieved a pretty broad scope.
You did. That particular moment in that video, you just realize, at a moment of whatever date she mentions, I think it was March 10th or 8th, that this profound transformation in her work took place. And it's such a powerful expression. I also think, related to something you have said, Wendy, I think in the interview about how, Zoom has changed. She also had created a kind of Zoom performance in a sense. It's such a beautiful way of using the medium and capturing at a certain moment. She talks about the weight of the paintings themselves. That's just fascinating. So Demi was one of the artists who references how strictly she needed to quarantine. Wendy, this resonates with a reflection you made in your interview when prompted to consider the question, what is missing? Let's play that video now.
My dad, his first language is Crow. And that's it for me. That generation, his generation, there's maybe one generation above him, but hardly any. If they get it, that's it. That's a whole knowledge base gone. And then I just think about my daughter, oh, I'm her source for Crow culture. And I'm not ready. And that's what I feel like is missing in the conversations around the pandemic and how it's affecting Indigenous people, is that in the Navajo Nation, most of the elderly folks of my dad's generation or the generation above him, they only speak Dene, so that's it. If we wipe them out, that's it for us, for my generation. And then we're the knowledge keepers. And so that's what I'm constantly thinking about when I'm taking care of him, and just really trying to soak up as much as I can. But it just seems like what a shame that would be, to be cut off because of, the way that the US government has not been proactive of getting a handle on the pandemic.
I'm not ready, but I'm going to have to be ready. Yeah, I think about that. I think every generation actually deals with that, feels that same sentiment of, being the next generation to hold the knowledge. Yeah.
Right. And that was certainly, that feeling was certainly present this summer. Ben, are there other instances that you recall from the interviews when similar sentiments were made, or similar statements were made about, I think one of the things, Wendy, that was so interesting or so important in what you said is that potential for generational loss. Ben, is that something that you noticed in some of the other interviews?
I did notice it quite a bit. And so it's not like Kay Walking Stick also talks about this in her interview with Melissa Ho. And I think this is it's a certain power in the conversations where you can talk around those gaps or those potential gaps to appreciate what is already there before it's lost. And you can also grieve what has been lost after the case. And so that was something that we were really, that comes through a lot of these interviews, people who are mourning because they're losing loved ones to the pandemic or to other causes. And just sort of this time of profound national grief and thinking about what we've all lost. You know, at that point, the death count was overwhelming, but by this point, you know, it's just astronomical. And it's also sort of paired with the new hope of vaccination. But we didn't have that in mind at the time. But yes, that profound sense of loss and how do we actually deal with this sort of mourning on a scale far beyond anything most people have dealt with in their lifetimes comes up quite frequently.
Right. And 2020 was, of course, a year of uprisings against racial injustice and correspondingly political activism and political distress, expressions of distress about this political moment are central to the archive's interviews. When you began this process, Ben, did you know that would be, you know, because it's called the Pandemic Oral History Project, and of course, but that's so important to these other instances or these other issues that emerge through these interviews.
I mean, of course, it was on our mind in general as part of the political landscape when we were forming them, although COVID-19 was much more to the forefront of our minds. But then in the wake of the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, I can safely tell you that it was that racial inequity in the United States is the most talked about topic through the interviews, if not, just like in terms of words that people want to use to address it. It is, it's through all of them. And it's a really powerful time of reflection too for people.
Right. And I think, you know, and you reached out to me today, Ben, in acknowledgement of yesterday's violence in Atlanta, and suggested that we add a video excerpt to tonight's event. It's of an artist in San Francisco. Her name is Nancy Homme. She was interviewed by Melissa Ho in the summer. Homme was the director of the Kearney Street Workshop and a co-founder of the Asian American Media Collective in New York City. So let's watch that video.
And so you can't say, oh, it's happening over there, or it's those people, or, you know, it will come around to happening to you, you know. I haven't personally this year encountered racial slurs or anything like that, but I have close friends who have been victims of racial attacks. And so it's just one degree of separation. It's just a matter of time.
It's very powerful to hear that today, and certainly very much a true statement as that we're living today as well. So there are aspects of these interviews that are certainly oral histories in the present tense. And so are there other aspects, Ben, from either Nancy's interview or others that you felt were particularly important in that regard, in drawing out these histories and this understanding?
Well, certainly Nancy's, I think, is just a really powerful and lucid account of sort of that fear that she's just living with and knowing that her community is in danger all the time. Lenore Chin, who's worked closely with Nancy Homme in the past, actually, but talked also about anti-Asian violence incidents in as early as May or June of last year in San Francisco, and her concerns about that, and the way that she was pouring herself into solidarity efforts with the queer community and So the Japanese American Society working with pride groups, working with Black Lives Matter in San Francisco, and the need for that cooperative effort to stand together and to find a new path forward and to really hold high offices to account. That accountability was the missing ingredient in all these, and the power for Lenore in her portraiture practice to strive for that. So that's a great interview with Lenore Chin.
Right. That's one I'll return to. Liza, did the archives capture the civil rights era in a comparably focused way? Is there a comparable, 60s, 70s, is there a comparable project from that era that you can point to, or is it more dispersed?
It is more dispersed. There wasn't anything of that particular focus. And that makes this project quite unique in our history. I wish we had taken that approach back in the early 60s. We did a series of interviews with African-American artists in 1968, almost on the heels of the assassination of Martin Luther King and other currents in the New York art world, particularly. But that it didn't address a lot of these issues head on. The great thing about this project really was just providing an open space for people to talk about what they wanted to talk about at this time. It was less directed than that. It was just a matter of confluence, I think, of all these ideas coming together with people having a similar experience in quarantine and a time to reflect on a lot of these really significant issues in our culture right now that brought these together. And so it wasn't so much that we went out to look for them, it's that we allowed them to surface in these kind of open-ended, those short dialogues.
Right. One of the most profound questions that is part of the interview is the first one. It's just, how are you? Right?
Yeah, that's where it began. And they get very deep very fast.
Right. And Wendy, I think you say something to the effect at the outset of your interview, that it's just great to be talking to you. There was a feeling of isolation in that moment that maybe has changed since we've all become so adept at screens in new ways. But
no, it's still good to just be able to connect.
Yeah. I think it's important to show a video that captures what may become one of the best known works from this era in terms of its international, knowing what it is. It's a work that Cadix Herrera and a group of artists in Minneapolis created in the days after the killing of George Floyd there. It's a video that it's a mural that was created just right adjacent to where the killing took place. Cadix Herrera is based in Minneapolis, and I'm actually forgetting, he was interviewed by Fernanda Espinosa. So let's watch that video.
The corner from the store where George Floyd actually was murdered, the Reverend Jesse Jackson came to speak, and Al Sharpton, and it was just such a moving experience for me. It's one of the things that stands out the most to me, because I was, I'm painting this mural and trying to figure out, the lines and getting just the technical parts of painting a mural, and I could hear Jesse Jackson's voice in the background, and he's doing the call and response, with the crowd, and it was just so moving and motivating.
So that capturing that video or that reflection will be, I think, one of those touchstones to understand how that work came about. How did you all, Ben, perhaps you could answer how you found your way to Cadix Herrera? Did you know of the mural and you contacted him, or did you know of his work as a muralist and an activist in Minneapolis?
We heard about the mural and reached out from there. So, and yeah, working through, I think news came internally through the Smithsonian, but I'm not quite sure what channels were there, but we were very happy to talk to him. That's a wonderful interview with Fernanda. And I think it really speaks to these vulnerable moments as seeds for connection and solidarity. And so it's, how you can find that via Zoom or in painting a mural with the crowd is very compelling and powerful to hear about.
Right. And also, the fact that people are protesting in moments, putting their bodies at risk for the sake of their convictions, even in this time of risk of disease from the coronavirus. Wendy, I thought, we just have a few more minutes, and if questions will be coming in, we'll switch to questions soon. But I wanted to touch on something that you reflected on in your interview about at the time, that it was a time of reflection for you. This is one of the other themes that you hear from a lot of artists in the interviews, that it's a moment to pause and reflect. It's a moment of protest as well, and of uncertainty and fear, but it's also a time to think about one's work and what you do moving forward. Is that still the case for you? And if so, or do you feel there's a difference between the summer of 2020 and the beginnings of the end of this winter in 2021?
Yeah, and in some ways, it's like when I review that video, I'm like, oh, who is that? And then, but now I feel now it's like a tremendous growth that is happening, where there was a period of reflection, unknowing. There's still unknowing, but sort of a movement forward, and the beauty is the connecting and people rising up, institutions rising up, artists. I just had Saya Wolflock contact me for a studio visit, and now we're going to do group studio visits. And I was like, I love you. I need that. And that's, to me, so beautiful that those sort of things and the connections are happening. So right now I'm just feeling more growth, like the reflection has happened and now there's action.
Yeah, that's great. Well, before we head into questions, I thought it would be great to watch one more video. This is from a clip from an interview that took place with, I guess it was in, now I don't see my note here. It's with Chanupa Hanska Luger, who is a New Mexico-based artist who was born in 1970 and raised on the Standing Rock Reservation. Let's play that video now.
So in the last, we'll wrap up here. What do you want to tell the artists in 100 years about what it was like to be an American artist in 2020?
Yeah, well, there was a place called America. I want to start with that.
So some dark humor in the summer of 2020, much certainly warranted. But it gets at this video gets at this question, and it shows Josh Franco. I was glad he was there because I didn't have in my notes, I'd forgotten who had done that interview. So it's great to see the person who interviewed you, Wendy, and has been a guide to your learning more about archives. This question of, what do you want to say to an American artist in 100 years was one of the questions that came up. And Ben, I'm curious how that emerged for you as a question, or for your team, and what, how would you characterize the responses you received?
Well, that was a Josh specific question, because we had total flexibility because you want people to have a conversation. And so, but Josh worked his magic and integrated it, I think, into every interview that he conducted. And it comes up in a few other interviews asking about the retrospective, how do you speculate on the future from now? And just a tremendous range of answers. I think Chanupa's is particularly powerful just because it breaks that ice of feeling so down about everything that we were for all of last year was just a haze, and to be able to puncture that with humor and then an extended conversation on the power of empathy and breaking cycles of abuse and harming your neighbors. So I think that's one that really sticks out to me. Another is with Carrie Moyer, who talks about thinking about the long view of progress and how what we've achieved today would have looked so different to people 100 years ago. And so to temper yourself, but to use the tempering of your expectations to strengthen it as an alloy, so you can steel yourself to do the most important work.
Mm-hmm. And Wendy, you spoke of that in your interview of how artists are good with uncertainty, and that's one of the strengths that artists bring, and perhaps can teach all of us. Perhaps we've all gotten a little bit better with uncertainty, as uncomfortable as it is. Well, let's turn to questions. We have a few. One question is for you, Wendy. Would you tell us more specifically how your work has changed this year?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I've added a little bit of play, a little more play to it. Like currently I have a show that opens next month at Sergeant's Daughters, and I'm working with ledger drawings, Plains ledger drawings, and I'm stealing horses. And that's just like a Crow thing that we did. I think that's why people hated us so much, because we were always stealing people's horses. And so I'm just playing more. And I think in a way I've allowed myself some freedom from the heaviness and the uncertainties to just have some fun and play.
That's great. We have a question here that's for me about the Lunder Institute for American Art and our Oral History Initiative, and what motivates our project. We focused mostly on the the pandemic oral history project, but we are in early stages of a vocal archive, and one of the things we've been interested to talk with the Archives of American Art about is the distinction or the decisions around sound, around audio and audio and video, right? In your case, you've gone to video, which I think is relatively new for the archive. Our vocal archive is looking at the collection and asking artists, contemporary artists, to speak about specific works in our collection. So to hear from them, and to when there is archival content that we can bring into play with those objects, to draw that out as well, so that becomes documented. One of the things we try to do at the Lunder Institute is think about the ways that there can be interconnections or blurring of lines between artists and the work of artists as creative researchers and the work of scholars. So finding the ways to learn about our collection and speak with artists, new knowledge through the voices of artists, but thinking about video versus the audio is a question for us. And I think that with the Pandemic Oral History Project, the video was the perfect medium for you all because of that connection, the how are you. connection made so much, was such an important part of it. This is a question for Ben and Liza. What do you imagine as the future of archival practice?
That's quite a big subject. I can tell you that there are things we're going to use from this project as our first big project in use of video and remote interviewing, that we learned some really interesting things that we're going to carry forward. And the flexibility of this format is really attractive to us, so that we could interview someone in Paris and not have to get on a plane to do it is a really great lesson that we've learned. So I think that aspect of it we will carry forward and continue to do remote interviews where that is possible and preferable.
I guess I would just add a little pivot, which is I think something that everyone else can learn from archives, is that sustainability is our entire mission. How do you keep these records? How do you preserve these voices for generations to come, and to honor them in their individuality and as they were, and to allow history to dynamically unfold, and to not pin things down. And so that's something that's so exciting about this, is that we preserve these things without saying this is exactly how it needs to be understood in the future, but giving people the opportunity to continually interpret history and understand it better. We just want to give them the primary sources necessary to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're asking you a little bit to do the interpretive work that you avoid so that you can not pin things down and keep them open. So I appreciate that. We have a question from, let's see, it says panelists shared some of the common reoccurrent themes that run through the recordings, such as reflections on generational knowledge loss during the pandemic. Were there surprising threads or unexpected connections that emerged among the reflections?
I'm not sure threads, but one thing that I really love in several of the interviews, I'm thinking specifically right now of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood and Billie L. Bankston, so Consuelo Jimenez Underwood is talking with Matthew Sims and talking about what she's doing with her work. And she says, "Oh, I'll just show you," and like picks up the whole computer and then does a studio visit, walking around with it. It's amazing, a very charming interview. And she addresses like the next generation of artists very directly, which I think is wonderful. And Billie L. Bankston, at the end of the interview, opens a box with a wax version of his head in it. And so that's a surprise. That's just an Easter egg you might not see otherwise.
There's also, I recall, an artist, and I'm forgetting her name, I hope you will remember, who uses a virtual background that begins with a bunker.
Now Bustamante, that's a great interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, Now Bustamante is great.
It is a surprising turn toward portraiture that I wasn't expecting in a lot of the interviews. People just, I guess maybe a return to representation that was an interesting thread for somebody to explore in the future. Why at this time is that a preoccupation?
Yeah, that's in go to Now's interview. She addresses that very beautifully about why do we lean on representational art in times of crisis?
Well, we'll have to leave that for interpreters in 100 years, I suppose, or perhaps less. I don't see any other questions. So, and we're getting towards the hour. I just want to, on behalf of the Lunder Institute, to thank Ben Gillespie, Liza Kirwin, and Wendy Red Star, and each member of the attending audience at this event And I want to acknowledge the Lunder Institute team, especially Daisy Desrosiers and Christina Carraz. Thanks as well to Julie Wang for video editing and Colby's fantastic audio and video staff, with special thanks to Ian Murphy, who's been behind the scenes today working his artistry. And last but not least, heartfelt thanks to Peter and Paula Lunder, who have made possible the Lunder Institute's work with the Colby Museum and its their partnerships within the field of American art. I want to remind everyone we have 2 more Lunder Institute Talks happening this spring. On April 22nd, Jessica Horton of the University of Delaware and Patricia Norby of the Met will be in conversation. And then on May 6th, Maya Lin will be with us in conversation with 2 Colby faculty members and Lunder Institute team member, Jessica Battario. So thank you so much again, and good night.
Good night.